Monsieur le Ministre, ma chère collègue Matthias Ruffert, Excellences, hôtes distingués, Mesdames et Messieurs, soyez le bienvenu. It is my honor to welcome you all here at Humboldt-Universität zu Berlin at the Forum Constitutiones Europae, hosted by the Walter Hallstein Institute for European Constitutional Law at the Humboldt-Universität with kind support of Stiftung Mercator. Ladies and gentlemen, the forum is a well-established tradition at this university, and we are very proud of it. Since the beginning of the series of lectures in 1998, many distinguished representatives of politics, of justice, of scholarship have presented their views, both on long-term as well as on current developments in the European Union and its role in the world, shaping the debate on European constitutional law. Joschka Fischer, Udo Di Fabio, Antonio Vitorino, Fritz Bolkestein, Martin Schulz, to name only a few of the high-ranking European politicians and thinkers who shared their perspectives and ideas on European integration, democracy, European identity, the European Constitution and EU law, the EU's challenges, crisis, and future paths at this Forum Constitutiones Europae, which was founded by my colleague Ingolf Pernice and now is organized by my colleague Matthias Ruffert. Today, it is my great pleasure and deep honor to welcome Monsieur le Ministre and candidate in the 2017 French presidential election, Emmanuel Macron, as our honorary to welcome you as our honorary guest and speaker. Only recently, in the light of the terrible terrorist attack, only a few S-Bahn stations from here, Monsieur Macron reminded us, nous sommes tous Berlinois, nous sommes tous Européens. This view highlights the EU as a community of fate that should reassure itself of its European values, not cutting itself off, but establishing closer European cooperation. Monsieur Macron, my gratitude and special thanks goes to you for your attendance and for sharing your perspective on the Franco-German relation and the future of the European Union with us tonight. And if you allow a final remark, as a patron of our International Legal Studies program, BERMUPA, I take pride in emphasizing the flourishing Franco-German friendship between Humboldt-Universität and the Université Panthéon-Assas Paris II. BERMUPA provides a framework for law students to engage in a Franco-German exchange and dialogue about both their national legal systems as well as the European and international law, thus strengthening mutual understanding and consolidating the Franco-German alliance. Tonight, we are further contributing to this valuable bond. Thank you very much.
Dear Vice President Obergfell, Mr. Macron, Professor Ruffert, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. My name is Verena Ringler, and I'm also very honored and delighted to welcome you all here tonight. I'm directing the International Affairs Department at Stiftung Mercator, which is a large private foundation here in Germany. And in our work, we always aim to foster cohesion in Europe and its capacity, our capacity to act jointly. Now, these aims might sound naive, outdated, or simply impossible to achieve. However, we understand that ambitious efforts and daring efforts are now more needed than ever for our European and global governance system and our societies. So what drives cohesion in Europe? Asked one of our project partners in a large study called the Cohesion Monitor. And the researchers found out that the one factor that keeps the fabric of Europeans together, that keeps Europeans together, are the people-to-people contacts. And so in everything we do, we devise these direct exchanges, these dialogue opportunities, and cooperation formats in a range of our projects. Take, for instance, the Mercator European Dialogue. There we invite parliamentarians from national parliaments to meet regularly across the borders and boundaries of committees and of countries. And they actually join from across the political spectrum, and they tell us that it is in this kind of space that they can develop fresh perspectives on burning European issues such as the migration or austerity debate. And in other projects, ranging all the way from expert dialogues to youth and school exchanges, we aim to invite Europe's young generation, including all of you sitting here, to get engaged and to understand that our voice and your initiatives count in shaping our future. And shaping our European future, this is also our common theme here tonight, and we look very much forward to Mr. Macron's thoughts and our discussion. Thank you.
Mrs. Vice President, Madame Goulard, Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, and above all, dear Monsieur Macron, it is my great pleasure to introduce you to the audience of the first lecture in 2017 in the Forum Constitutiones Europae, organized by the Walter Hallstein Institute for European Constitutional Law with the support of Mercator Foundation and the European Commission. Given the enormous interest in your lecture, people appear to know you already, and indeed some facts are known to many of us. Emmanuel Macron is a young politician originating from Amiens, a very young one, to be honest. And in this young career, he managed to achieve various goals. Graduate in philosophy, alumnus to the famous French elite school ENA, high civil servant, then investment banker, advisor in economic matters, at first in the private sector, then to President François Hollande. He joined the French cabinet in 2014 to become the Minister for Economics, Industry and Digital Matters, and he left this post to become a candidate for the 2017 presidential election, and in this context he founded the movement En Marche. What beyond these facts lies behind the overwhelming interest in Emmanuel Macron's lecture of today? I think there are 2 points worth being mentioned which are so uncontested that I do not fear to run the risk to intervene into the French presidential campaign. First, economic expertise. When we German scholars of European economic law look at what happens in France, even in the spirit of doubtless sympathy for this country, we are at least confused. More than often, social market economy is not mirrored in French concepts like service public. And this may be a reason why the Franco-German relationship does not currently work as an engine to bring Europe out of the crisis. Emmanuel Macron triggered important reforms, the most important summed up in the Loi Macron. I would submit that his perspective could open the door to new Franco-German initiatives. Second, European integration. There is no need to waste time describing the deep poly-crisis, to quote the President of the Commission, the EU is facing. Looking at the programs of the candidates for the French presidency, we find outdated concepts in Europe, on Europe, stressing the nation state. And we find them where we would expect them, but unfortunately, not only there, we also find them where we would not expect them. Emmanuel Macron has a clear pro-European vision, and this alone makes him an ideal speaker for the Forum Constitutionis Europae. Monsieur Macron, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Directeur, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur, Monsieur le Ministre, Mesdames, Messieurs les parlementaires, Mesdames, Messieurs, l'usage voudrait que je parle en français. D'ailleurs, un tel sujet, je peux vous le dire, est scruté de très près en France. Et ce serait déroger à la règle de manière indue de ne pas parler ce soir en français devant vous. Néanmoins, j'ai pris l'habitude de préférer être compris des auditoires. Alors, l'autre option pourrait être de parler en allemand. Mais là, je pense que ça ne répondrait pas davantage à l'objectif. Compte tenu, vous allez le voir à quelques occasions, de l'accent médiocre que ma scolarité m'a laissé. J'ai donc pris le parti, et que les classiques m'excusent de cela, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur, sous votre contrôle, mais j'ai pris le parti de vous parler ce soir en anglais, par facilité, et pour que nous puissions toutes et tous nous comprendre plus facilement. Et je voudrais, avant de commencer cette réflexion partagée, parce que c'est plus cela que je suis venu faire avec vous, et l'engagement que je veux prendre devant vous ce soir, je voudrais avant tout rendre hommage à Roman Herzog, parce que il est disparu aujourd'hui. M. Herzog était aussi celui à qui nous devons la Charte des droits fondamentaux, des grands principes qu'il a inscrits justement dans ce texte. Et je voudrais peut-être, paraphrasant imparfaitement ce qu'il avait, il y a quelques décennies, dit pour l'Allemagne, commencer mon propos en disant « Durch Europa muss ein Ruck gehen ». Because I just want to take two events to justify the discussion we have today and the fact that a strong commitment for Europe is absolutely critical today for France and for Germany in the opening of our presidential campaigns. A little more than 15 days ago, Berlin was hit by a tragic attack, and you revert on it, and I expressed myself on, obviously, this tragedy. And Berlin was attacked because Berlin was European as well. A few days later, Istanbul was attacked as well by the terrorists. So we are now totally in a new story. And the tragedy of our history is part of our current context. And we cannot discuss about our current environment without taking into consideration the fact that it's no more the end of our history. We are fully part of a new tragic history and a new tragic struggle. And this struggle is a European struggle for me, because it's about the security of our people, and it's about our ability to preserve our values in such a struggle. The second event I wanted to mention is that a little more than 15 years ago, in May 2000, in this very place, dear Joschka, you pronounced a major speech that did not receive the echo or the answer, I should say, that this speech deserved from France. I think it was a big mistake. Definitely. And probably we lost 15 years after the speech. I'm not saying that such an answer would be sufficient to deal with these two events, but definitely we do need now such an answer to the speech. And I have a secret hope by opening this discussion, which is not to wait for 15 years regarding what I will mention. So I want tonight to speak in your inspiring tradition and try to see where we are and how to address our challenges. Because during these 15 years, our world completely and drastically changed. And this world was transformed by 4 crises, I would say. The first is a crisis of security in the first place. As I said, we rediscovered that the end of history was a myth. The Yugoslav wars warned us. September 11 opened up our eyes. And the recent Ukrainian, Syrian, or Libyan conflicts showed us that violent conflicts are at our doorsteps. But more than everything, terrorism on our soil made us understand that security and defense were neither a luxury nor somebody else's concern. That's a very big change during this past decade. The second is a migration crisis. And the reality of such a crisis is very different between France and Germany, to be fair, because the reality of its impacts are totally different. And I want to repeat here what I mentioned a few days ago in the op-ed issued in your press. I do believe that the German society indeed faced with a lot of lucidity and courage this refugee crisis. Why? Because it was just about our common values. Because when you speak about refugees, you speak about people leaving their countries to protect their family and protect themselves, because for political reasons, they cannot stay in their country. In a lot of our debates, we made a lot of confusions between refugees, migrants, terrorism, Muslim people, to say the reality of this awful mixture. We have to be very tough and lucid on terrorism. We have to be very strict when communitarism increased and when some people want to fragilize and jeopardize our societies. But we do so to protect our values at the end of the day, to protect our people and protect our values. But if we forget our values in the same times, what's the purpose of such an initiative? What's the purpose of this fight? So I do believe that the German reaction was a very strong and a very telling decision to remind us how important our values are today. The third crisis is the economic one. The burst of the internet bubble warned us at the turn of the century, and the 2008 crisis triggered in the US, spread all around the world, left a mark that is still visible on our economies and weakened millions of Europeans, in particular the younger generation in Southern Europe. And I have to say, we are exiting this crisis, perhaps. But the way we addressed this economic crisis in Europe was definitely not the best answer, because of the lack of trust between member states, because of the fact that we decided not to have, in an aggregated approach, the smart answer. After a decade of moral hazard in some countries, the answer was about reforms and over-consolidation without any coordination in a lot of countries, in what we called, and I hate this word, the periphery of Europe. It's not the periphery of Europe when you speak about Italy, Greece, Portugal, and so on. But the result of this period of time is that 8 years after this crisis, a generation just experienced Europe with 50% of unemployment rate in their country, without any ability on our side, from the German and the French side, to negotiate, decide precisely a new trigger, a new phase for an actual European growth. And there is no fate for that when you compare Europe with the US. The fourth crisis is indeed a European crisis, largely due to the fact that nobody was in a situation to address your Quo Vadis question. After the rejection of the European Constitution by France and the Netherlands, we have thought that it would be better to leave the field. And we have set aside the ambitious reflections of the previous decade, from the ideas of Karl Lammers and Wolfgang Schäuble to the project of the Joschka Fischer and the thoughts of Alain Juppé. A lot of people proposed during the 1990s a lot of new ideas. But after 2005, we stopped. And I have to say, both France and Germany have the perfect recipe for such a blockage. Let's start speaking about financial transfer to a German, and we will stop the discussion. Let's start speaking about treaty change to a French. It will stop the discussion. During the past decade, we failed altogether to progress, to have a new phase in the European construction because of this crazy choreography. And I want to stop with that. And the financial crisis that has become a euro crisis precipitated us in an emergency management. The migrant crisis and the Brexit added another lot of last chance summits to the monthly schedule of European leaders. We are experts in the current environment of last chance summits. Which is the best way to fix the situation? Probably, but not to build a new phase and to address long-term issues. And as Jacques Delors said, for Europe, we need a vision and a screwdriver. Unfortunately, we currently have a lot of screwdrivers, but we are still lacking a vision. I do not want to draw too bleak a picture of this last decade, even if, according to me, for Europe, it was a lost decade. It was also the decade of the European enlargement that has reconciled the two sides of our continent. It was the decade of our digital revolution, which is not yet finished, and the decade of climate change awareness, with a lot of very first important decisions. For the European project, nevertheless, it was definitely a lost decade, because distrust has spread. The European Council has become a scene where each head of state stages its so-called victory over the other members. We perfectly know this choreography as well. Now, discussing between head of states and governments is a discussion on a communiqué. And when the leaders agree on a communiqué, they go in front of their public opinion, on their press, to express it was their communiqué, and they won against the other. It's not the best way to build the European idea and to build European answers. To the extent that today, the end of Europe, the exit, the return of nationalism is a new magical thinking. Wouldn't France be better off without German obsessions of Brussels diktats? We could spend much more. And that's a motto for a lot of candidates at this presidential election. And wouldn't Germany be better off without Gallic frenzy or Greek model? You could spend less. Should be much better. I could also have a much more demagogic message nowadays and tell you, in turn, that Europe is out of date. It would be easier, I have to say, especially in a French presidential campaign, to say that Germany and France have moved apart so much that it is time to work on new alliances, that I will renverser la table pour parler durement aux Allemands, which is the best way to be popular in my country. But that's a deadlock. From both sides, for decades, leaders decided precisely to create a new relationship with Germany, to completely change the relationship and to be tough with this bad partner. That's pure bullshit. How can we not see that our challenges are the same? How can we not see that terrorism is not only a French or German problem? That the Paris Agreement on climate change is not an issue for Berlin too. That in a globalized world, necessary protections will not come from merely national policies, but from European firmness carried by our two countries. We do have common interests. And the four crises I mentioned, which completely changed our current environment during these past decades, are four common crises. I have been promoting in the past month a revolution of our system, a change of the political and economic software inherited from post-war growth. And yet, I do speak of Europe. I do defend the European project. I do pay tribute to this enlightened man who had the crazy idea to reconcile our continent, unite its people for the first time in history without submission or violence. Because for me, what is unicity of the European Union? That's the very first time in our common history that we created a unique political body without any hegemony. That's a balanced, peaceful organization. That's why it created peace, freedom, and growth during more than 6 decades. And being European so a few years ago was a boring commonplace, I have to say, and today it almost sounds as a provocation. So the project I want to submit to you this evening, our project, my project both for France and Europe, is based on two critical ideas. More sovereignty, but more European sovereignty. And unifying people, which means more actual democracy. This reconstruction, it is the ambition that I carry and that I want to present here. This reconstruction is based on the fact that we do need a Europe of sovereignty. The big mistake we made during the past decades is to abandon this word, sovereignty. But sovereignty is just how to protect your people, how to protect your interests, and how to promote your interests in the rest of the world. And our main mistake was to leave this word to those who promote a nationalistic approach. But the actual sovereignty, given our current challenges, is also, and probably most of the time, a European sovereignty to be built. The European construction started in the early 1950s, sheltered from the American bloc. And in Berlin, we know more than anywhere else that this period was also a time of fractures and tensions. And here in Berlin, we also know how much the European construction has contributed in terms of for our continent and the international community. But the European project was not conceived for Europe to assert itself in global politics. It was aimed at stitching back together a ripped continent, at bringing back together the enemies of yesterday, at giving back peace and economic prosperity to a territory in ruin. Europe has moved forward this way, being mostly inward-looking, and from treaty to treaty, developing themselves by lawful relations rather than power relations. The European communities have become a European Union which deserved its name. But Europe was somehow obsessed by internal competition, by its single market and the convergence between its members, and we failed to do so. But the three disruptions, the four crises that I mentioned, have weakened this progression and revealed the necessity for Europe to carry a proper vision of the world. And that's a big challenge today. Because as the US is completely changing its strategy, and it's not due to Mr. Trump's election, during the past 5 to 7 years, the US completely changed their strategy in Middle East, and they stopped with their classical post-World War strategy to protect Europe and to build with Europe a common protection in this region of the globe. Today we are put in a situation where Europe has to defend in its own interests regarding security in Middle East and regarding its interests in terms of climate change and so on. So when you look at the situation, definitely we have to rebuild and rethink about the European strategy. It's no more an inward-looking strategy. We do have a role, and a global role today, in order to protect our people, in order to protect our climate, and in order to protect our common economic interest. We often spoke about l'Europe de la puissance, not always knowing what we wanted to do with that. I defend today a Europe of sovereignty, because sovereignty means that the capacity of acting in concrete terms to protect ourselves and defend our values. Because I cannot accept leaving the idea of sovereignty to the far right of the far left populists and their lies. And for me, this sovereignty is based on 5 pillars. The first one is a security challenge, both internal and external, because it is the first tool of sovereignty, and yet we still lack the most at the European level. Sicherheit nach außen zu gewährleisten, sich selbst verteidigen zu können, ist aber Voraussetzung und innerster Kern jeglicher Souveränität von Staaten. Dies gilt demnach für die EU als Gemeinschaft von Staaten in dem Sinne, dass sie überhaupt nur noch so durch die Gemeinschaft Souveränität erhalten können. These words, perfectly accurate, I have to confess, are not mine. Thank you. But those of Karl Lammers and Wolfgang Schäuble in their famous publication on European policy in 1994. Probably another call to action without a lot of echo and answer. Security is, in the first place, understanding that our true borders are the EU borders. When we speak about migration, when we speak about terrorism, it's not about national and domestic borders. It doesn't make sense. It means preserving the Schengen agreements that are a fundamental achievement in the first place for the millions of everyday cross-border commuters. And for this, we must, in the meantime, strengthen the monitoring and the common administration of our external borders. You understand? I do believe that the right answer of this challenge is a European answer. But I don't believe that our current organization today is sufficient vis-à-vis this new environment. The recent creation of the European Border and Coast Guard Agency, with increased resources and extended missions, is a major progress. But we must go further, set an objective of at least 5,000 people that can be mobilized, increase the resources of this agency, and enable it to intervene lastingly in the member state in order to protect our borders. We do need an external police force at our common borders. Because the best way to protect my population is not to block everybody at my frontier with Belgium, Netherlands, or Germany. It doesn't make sense, that's crazy. But everybody who arrive in Lampedusa, Lesbos, or at any frontiers and borders of our current organization is critical to me as well. And if I want to be credible vis-à-vis my people, I do need such an approach. I do need a pragmatic and much more efficient European answer. Those who pretend to kill Schengen, they just want to restore a national and a domestic answer. It's not efficient. But when you say, I want to preserve Schengen, which for me is the most sensible answer, it means I want to transform Schengen into something much more efficient in order to deal with my security and my people's security. Second, I want to develop a common asylum policy. Why? Because we do need to coordinate ourselves. And Dublin is no more sufficient. I don't want to completely destroy Dublin agreements. But today, what's the result of the current situation? You have millions of people taking a risk for their families and their lives without any perspective of the final answer. And we leave the burden to the Greeks, the Italians, and so on. That's our common responsibility, both German and French. We have to build together a common asylum policy in order to discuss and build agreements with third countries, with origin countries, and with third countries with a lot of refugees already. What we had to do is not to negotiate on a very fragile basis a wishy-washy agreement with Turkey, to be fair. We had to negotiate with Turkey how to deal with their refugees months and months ago in order to see how to accept some refugees and provide an actual asylum to them. It was the appropriate answer. So we have to reorganize at a European scale a common answer because it's more efficient and it's more respectful vis-à-vis our common values, because you avoid thousands, millions of people to take useful risks with a family in the Balkan route or in the Mediterranean Sea. We must, at the European level, develop cooperation agreements with the major immigration and transit countries based on development and financial assistance, support for borders control and agreements on the return of migrants unauthorized to enter or to remain in the EU. That's the third point of such a strategy. What does that mean? That's this realistic approach. Our duty is indeed to protect refugees when they risk their lives. Our duty is to organize ourselves with a common organization to deal with that. But it's now impossible to explain our people and our public opinion that you don't grant the asylum and you don't grant the papers to these migrants. Today you are not in a situation precisely to organize the return of these migrants to their countries. Because there is a sort of lose-lose game between France, Germany, and these countries. What I want to do is to organize at a European level such an organization in order to provide much more efficiency. An annual conference should bring at the same table the EU and these countries in order to follow up on these agreements and make further European support conditional upon the actual implementation. this is the only way to set up a genuine European migration policy, both fair and effective. And I endorse such a perspective, because this is the only way, vis-à-vis our public opinion, to be both generous, to be both in line with our values, and efficient. We must also create a common intelligence system, overcoming national reluctance, that enables an effective tracking of criminals and terrorists, and in the longer run, a common police force against organized crime and terrorism. We must face together, without being naive, the actual threats of the virtual world, cyber terrorism, as well as any type of cyber attack. We do have the industry to do so. We have the best players in the world with Israel to deal with this kind of behavior. We have to work together in order to deal with this new phenomenon. Security also relies on a defense policy up to the threats we are facing. I want to escape the stereotype of a France in charge of international affairs, but stuck in its internal problems, and of a Germany economically powerful but naive in front of global threats. It's no more the situation. And I have to say, on both sides, Russia is no more just a German problem or a German exclusivity and a French passion, I have to say. And if you follow French policy, it's actually a brand new passion, as some of my competitors may lead you to believe. And on the other side, interventions in Africa are not the sole responsibility of France. I notice, incidentally, that there are more German than French soldiers involved in Mali. When you speak about Euro-Mediterranean policy, it's not a French business. It's a European business. It's your business in Germany as well, because you are impacted by this reality. So, what I want to say to you this night is that now we do have on these affairs a common interest. Germany has become fully aware of the necessity of a strong defense and a European defense. And the White Book presented this year by Ursula von der Leyen testifies to this. And we have now a unique opportunity to move forward together. The European Union spends half as much as the United States on defense, even less if we take the Brexit into account. European cooperation on military equipment programs is weaker than 10 years ago. We must swiftly create a European defense fund, financing research programs as well as common defense capacities. And in this respect, we need to encourage joint defense spending through funding via the EU budget and a common debt capacity based on European defense bonds. Why? Because this is a unique opportunity on both sides. Germany is changing its strategy on defense and diplomacy. And I think it's a very important and smart decision. And we now have to act together. I don't believe about French people saying, La grande France seule va parler à la grande Russie. Good luck. Good luck. Because you will discover that Russia indeed is in Europe, geographically and historically speaking, that we have a lot of passions together, that's true, literature, culture, and that Russian people live themselves as Europeans. But I'm sorry to say that, but you have Russian leaders who don't share our values and our views. So you have to speak with Russia in order to fix the Syrian situation, in order to deal on different issues. You have to speak with them and never stop discussing with them. But if you want to be credible, you have to speak as Europeans. You have to speak both and all together, France and Germany. And the day we will have to fix the Libyan situation, the day we will have to discuss both with Algeria and Egypt about the Libyan issue, we will have to work together to be credible and to be efficient. Yet, with more resources but without the willpower to act together, we remain powerless. That's why we must develop a true capability for political action, a permanent European headquarters in charge of operation, planning, and monitoring, working hand in hand with national command and national command centers, and NATO is essential. Perhaps some leaders will make some mistake with NATO. We shall not trigger such a crisis. I propose the establishment of a European Security Council gathering the military, diplomats, intelligence experts to advise European decision takers, especially in case of threats or attacks. The time of choices has come. If the ambition of taking action together is not shared in the whole Union, we must find ways to move forward faster in a smaller group. We shouldn't be blocked by the decision of some people, which means we have to be ready to work together, France and Germany, with the other member states which could decide to join the club. And the treaties offer the possibility of doing so, a possibility that we should examine in the coming month. Because without this will of moving forward, the best tools in the world will be useless. I'm referring, for example, to the battle groups put in place nearly 10 years ago and that we must finally be able to activate. We do not need a treaty change to do so. We need a political willingness to move forward and a political awareness of this new environment and our new challenges. This defense endowed with the resources and ambition, it means Europe opening its eyes and taking its responsibilities. It is the best way to resist the fantasy of national retrenchment and the uncertainties from our American partner. It is a capability of common action in our own way, but it is not calling into question NATO. A strong Europe can only strengthen this alliance. The second pillar of the sovereignty approach is our currency. Europe needs a stronger economic and monetary union. We must here again avoid the half-pregnancy attitude and give up unfounded accusations. It is today in fashion to blame the euro, often on the exact opposite grounds in France and in Germany, I have to say. It is a good indication of the unfairness of this trial, probably. On one side, some pretend that euro is the origins of an austerity policy, which doesn't exist in France, I have to reassure you. And on the other side, euro would be responsible for a sort of moral hazard and the inability of some other member states to reform themselves. Please, go to Portugal and see the reforms. So, the truth is that we must collectively recognize that the euro is incomplete and cannot last without major reforms. When I was minister with Sigmar Gabriel, we asked Jean Pisani-Ferry and Henrik Enderlein to work on such a report for convergence between France and Germany and try to deal with this incomplete eurozone, because I do believe that part of the answer is in our hands, but part of the answer is in our common initiative. It has not provided Europe with a full international sovereignty against the dollar and its rules. It has not provided Europe with an actual convergence between the different member states. What is our situation today with euro? We failed in convergence policy. When you look at the situation, the dysfunctioning of euro is a good news for Germany, I have to say. You benefit from this dysfunctioning. Part of your success is due to your reforms. And part of our lack of success is due to the fact that in the same time we didn't reform. So I'm not refusing to take into consideration this big difference. But in the same time, the dysfunctioning of the Eurozone creates unbalanced reactions and favor a sort of productive center against the rest of the zone. Why? Because Euro today is a sort of a weak Deutsche Mark, which favors the German industry. And our competitiveness approach between member states is not an answer, or is a deadlock, because of the fact they cannot adjust through a monetary policy. And as we decided not to have any solidarity and financial transfer within the Eurozone, it's impossible to deal with our divergence. So I have to say we failed with an actual convergence approach. And when you took the euro at a global scale, we failed in terms of sovereignty in order to preserve our sovereignty against the dollar. Look at our banks. Look at our common policy in Russia, in Iran. We are not able, as Europeans, to accompany our corporates in these markets because of the diktat of the Americans. Because of the fact that they have an actual super sovereignty in monetary terms. So if we want an actual monetary policy, we need to strengthen the euro as an international currency. How to deal with that? We are blocked by the lack of trust between France and Germany. We are blocked by the moral hazard obsession and the fact that today we just have a sort of responsibility approach. We ask for structural reforms and fiscal consolidation without any solidarity. And we didn't manage post-crisis to deal with that. My view is that first, there is a French responsibility to fix the situation. We have to restore trust with Germany by implementing reform. That's why in my program, I do endorse a series of reforms on labor market, on vocational system, on education, what we called in Brussels structural reforms. I don't like this word because it's not very telling for people. But strong reforms in order to realign our economy on the German, precisely, success and deliver in terms of reform and credibility. Second, our responsibility is to respect our own commitments on the fiscal side. We are the one with the Germans and the others who decided on our fiscal European policy. So we have to respect this policy. We have to respect our common commitments, and we have to be smart with our treaties on both sides. But that's a precondition. Having said that, I do want, in the same time, to create a dynamic, this new deal, to convince Germany to spend much more here, to have a much more growth-friendly policy. You need more investment. You need a much more growth-friendly approach. And we need together to trigger much more investment at the European level. That's why, and it was the basis of the common op-ed we issued with Sigmar Gabriel almost 1.5 years ago. For me, the battle is to put in place a budget for the Eurozone. And this budget will have to be backed by a borrowing capacity and by its own resources, with 3 objectives: financing key investment for the future, providing emergency financial assistance from the actual European Stability Mechanism, and helping Eurozone members in case of a large economic shock. It will have to be placed under the scrutiny of the members of the European Parliament from concerned countries. The establishment of this budget will have to come with a convergence agenda for the Eurozone, an anti-dumping agenda that will set common rules for fiscal and social matters. Because no country can benefit from collective solidarity and play against its partners. A common currency is a major political project linking our destinies. The European Central Bank has done a lot to make this project work. Its independence and its action must be respected. But we cannot rely on its action alone. In a monetary union, a country's success cannot be sustainably achieved to the detriment of another, which is the limit of a competitiveness approach. Because competitiveness, it's always when you compare yourself with a neighbor. The difficulties of one are always the problem of all. The economic and monetary union involves a strict responsibility and a deep solidarity. Clear rules, loyal cooperation, strong mutual assistance. This is the New Deal I'm promoting, the only deal which can rebuild trust and generate growth. That's why I do believe in this balance between responsibility and solidarity. That's our economic and political duty. Why? Because if we don't do so, in 10 years or 15 years' times, dear Joschka, if somebody comes here in this university to make such a speech, our risk is not to have euro anymore. Because the statu quo is a synonymous in 10 years' time of a dismantling of the euro from economic and financial reason, but because this generation in half of Europe, which just experienced 50% of young unemployment rate, is no more a European generation, my friends. So that's a political duty to relaunch from an economic point of view an actual economic and pro-growth ambition. The third pillar of this sovereignty policy is a trade policy. I know it's an awful word today, both in France and Germany. But trade is about our interest. So the actual way to relaunch a trade policy is to say we have to work together. When we failed is when we tried to push our own domestic agenda. When Germany refused to deal at a European scale vis-à-vis the Chinese on photovoltaic issues and solar panels, we failed. It was not a smart decision. When the French people tried to preserve their interests and not to deal at the European level on trade policy, we fail. Why? Because our actual trade sovereignty is at the European level. The only way to deal with a dumping decision in China or in India or in Russia is at the European level. We do need a much bolder trade policy at the European level. I push very much for that as a minister, and I do welcome the recent decision to modernize our trade instruments. But we have to do much more than that. We have to be aggressive on the trade agenda to promote our own collective preferences. We don't want to be submitted to the American or the Chinese decisions. But if we don't organize ourselves, we will be de facto submitted to the decisions. What we want to do is to promote our collective preferences, our values, our taste for culture, our preference for climate change decisions, our collective preferences for food, and so on. We do need a European agenda to do so, and we have to build it together. And it will be a very important agenda from 2017. The fourth pillar is about sustainable development, Danny, about environment and energy. You are delivering a very bold policy in Germany with a very aggressive renewable program. In France, we are decreasing our exposure to nuclear energy, and I want to pursue such a strategy because I think that's the good strategy, not to have a hard exit, but to have a smart exit and in the same time to promote and invest on renewables. But if we want to succeed, we do need a European strategy on sustainable development. We have the collective responsibility to lead our continent's ecological transition by creating an effective carbon market with predictable and sufficiently high prices, and by strengthening our energy markets interconnections and a common strategy in energy storage. We do need common rules and common infrastructures. That's a unique way to deliver and to be consistent with our global commitments. Europe has above all a commitment and a duty. Ensure the fair and complete implementation of the historic agreement reached in Paris last year. And the fifth pillar, to have a sovereign Europe, is about digital. We are in the middle of the digital revolution. And as I said to French people, I don't want to be the French president of a French Google. It's counterintuitive, I have to say, especially for French people. But why? Because it will never exist. It's impossible. We have a chance, perhaps, to create a European Google. That's why, if we want an actual sovereignty in terms of digital revolution, we do need a European approach. First, to create a single market, which means to allow our people and our startups, when they create a startup in Germany, to access to a 27 countries market and not just to the German market, and to deal day after day with the other regulations. But in the same time, to promote our common preferences and our common regulations. When I speak about a single market, it's not just to say we will lift barriers. No, I want us to create an actual economic regulation in order to create value for our corporates with the data. I want to create an actual European regulation to be in a situation to explain my people how I will protect that data. Because today I have to be frank. We are not in a situation to guarantee you about US interference on your data. It's not true. We have this treaty extremely fragile vis-à-vis our own legislation with the US. But we don't have any actual guarantee about what the GAFA are doing with your personal data. If you want to protect your right to be forgotten, if you want to protect precisely your privacy, you need a European regulation to do so. And that's the core of our sovereignty today and tomorrow. So we do need a European regulation and a European single market in order to have an actual European sovereignty on digital. That's why I wish that our two countries suggest together the creation of not just the single market digital union, but as well to create a European agency for digital trust in charge of verifying at a European level the respect by big digital companies of their transparency duty and of the access to their services without discrimination. These 5 pillars of sovereignty are critical and the core of my project for France and Europe. But it's not sufficient. We have to resume sovereignty in Europe, but in the same time, we have to unite people. These 5 key domains delineate a Europe that protects us and promotes our values. But moving together is a necessity, as we are more efficient collectively. But moving together because we share an identity is the true reason for our project. And no one said it better than Jean Monnet. We are not forming coalitions of states. We are uniting men. What does that mean? Is that we have to change our way to proceed with Europe. And we need a much more democratic approach. Today, the deadlock for pro-European is to say, I defend the European idea, so that I'm afraid of my people, and I want to preserve the classical choreography, so we will meet together between leaders and everything will be perfectly fine. This method is dead. Look at Bratislava. Look at the recent summit. As I told you, it's not the best way precisely to create a new momentum and prepare your future. In the same time, we decided all together, governments, to weaken the ability of the Commission to do so. In the 1980s, the Commission was in charge of common interest and designing precisely our futures for decades. let's be lucid, it's no more the case. Because of us. On the other side, a lot of people are promoting referendum, not to build, but to destroy, saying, okay, let's ask our people. Whatever the question will be, the answer will be no. Because we know the current functioning. What I want to promote is a new method to precisely ask people to be part of the solution, encompass people, and renovate our democratic practices, not to leave the monopoly of the people to the populists. This is the reason why I suggested the organization of democratic conventions after the French and German elections. I suggest, and I will suggest, as President of the French Republic, to launch democratic conventions in the whole Union during 6 to 10 months in each country. It will be a debate on the content of the Union's action, on the policies it carries, on the priorities it should have. This debate will rebuild trust beyond partisan games and beyond national interests. It will enable to propose a common answer where binary referendum, for or against, only adds up contradictory refusals and concentrates rejections without a project. What I want to build with these conventions is not a 200 pages treaty. That's a big mistake, because as nobody reads it, that's a Pandora box for all the demagogues and liars. No, what we have to build is a roadmap for Europe. Not a vast treaty, but a 10 to 15 pages where we define a clear list of actions that countries willing to move forward can put in place as quickly as possible. In terms of defense, security, fiscal convergence, for example. It will be possible for all countries to participate to this move, but not to obstruct everything. And for me, after this process, we will have, obviously, an intergovernmental conference. We will decide, and we will go to the people to ratify, to the parliament, and some will choose referendum. But with one clear rule, and I refer to what Mario Monti and Sylvie Goulard proposed, which is the fact that if one country refuses, he is not in a situation to block the others. It takes his responsibility for itself. That's extremely important. This doesn't mean giving up all institutional reforms. And I think back again at Joschka Fischer's striking remark 16 years ago. How can we conceive a European Council with 30 heads of state and government? It's true. I think it doesn't function very well. This is where we are. Institutional reforms will be necessary. Treaty changes will come, and we have to face that. There should be no taboo. Some reforms can go faster to give room to a prosper European democratic debate. In this regard, I fully support Daniel Cohn-Bendit's idea of using the quota of 73 British members of the European Parliament to create a truly European list for the next Parliament election in 2019. That's a pragmatic approach to start changing an actual European democratic approach. For you. That's a pragmatic approach because what we have to use the treaty at the maximum of the options. And we have to prepare a necessary treaty change. And we have to start now. And that's why we do need, in the same time, a European ethic, a revamped democratic method, renewed policies, then renovated institutions. But we need to unite people, a European ethic, a desire to live together, an awareness of our shared identity, loyalty to our values. It relies on each and every one of us. This is the reason why I pay tribute to your Chancellor and the remarkable action in the refugee crisis. And this is the reason why I'm here today, in front of you. because this European ethic cannot exist without France and Germany. The European project is based on a Franco-German reconciliation. There is a cultural dimension in the broadest sense that we should never forget. Countries and people who killed each other now work together. It is because we do not think in the same way, because our immediate interests sometimes differ, but because we share a history made of bloody conflicts, that we need each other, and that Europe needs us together. Our role, our historical role and duty, and we don't have any choice, is to work together, is to trigger a new era for our Europe, because that's our history and our responsibility. And I want just to take here the invitation made by Willy Brandt in order to extend this invite to France and Germany and Europe. Es wächst zusammen, was zusammen gehört. That's our situation. And that's especially the reason why here, in front of students, I want to conclude by talking about yours. Our European ethic, so deep-rooted among the generation of the founding fathers, traumatized by the war, got lost at the time of a day-to-day business. I have to say to you, for your generation, there is no more day-to-day business. It's finished. It can only be regenerated thanks to you, your generation, with your concrete experience of Europe. There are today two categories of European. Those who can travel, this Erasmus generation, this happy Europe, and half of a generation without a job at a few kilometers from here. Our common commitments was not to propose to a young Spaniard as a future to come to work in Berlin or in Munich. Is to have the opportunity to do so, but it should not be the unique way. That's not a responsible answer. Our commitment, the initial commitment, was his life would be better thanks to Europe. And it's no more the case. And I want to reconcile these two youth. And that's why I do believe in Europe. And I do believe that your generation will be in charge of these reforms because it will take decades. We will have to trigger and start the job now, but it will take times and decades. But please, never leave the floor to those who doubt, to those who hate Europe. During this past decade, a lot of leaders betrayed Europe. Why? Because they stopped speaking about Europe. Because they stopped proposing anything about Europe. Why? Because they thought that their population preferred just to stop and doubt. And they left the floor to those who want to kill Europe without any memory of our history, without any responsibility about our common history and our common future. Your role is to criticize Europe, to be more demanding vis-à-vis Europe. I do agree with that. But to defend it, and to defend every day the Franco-German cooperation, because this is the unique path for us. And this is because Europe should not be a luxury or a gadget. that I defend an Erasmus program generalized to all young people. In France, I set an ambition of enabling by 2022 200,000 young people per year to study or do an apprenticeship at least 6 months in another country of the Union. It is to forge this identity and this ethic, grounded in the knowledge of the other rather than the fear of the neighbor, that I want to re-establish bilingual and European classes in France. Because that's important. And revive school twinning in Europe and strengthen the action of the Franco-German Youth Office. Maximum diversity in minimum space. This is what Europe is about. Look at the map. There is no other place with such a diversity, with so many languages, with so many wars, decades after decades, with so many differences, in such a small place. But we did it. We built a unique, common, democratic political construction of peace, freedom, and prosperity. Today it's at stake. And I have to say, to conclude, the European construction was initiated by men of experience, instructed by the tragedy of the European Civil War, and it now relies on young people like you, a generation that knows what a crisis is, that discovers the turmoil of the world and the violence of history. A generation that must ensure together that Europe tips over the right side at this moment in history when the continent trembles. This is our responsibility, both Germany and France. And there was a very unique philosopher in France, Emmanuel Levinas, and he had a very beautiful sentence about, it was a Jewish philosopher, and speaking about trust, he wrote, "La confiance, c'est le problème de l'autre." And I have to say, one of our main issues is the lack of trust. I will take my responsibility. France will take its responsibility. I do want much more Europe, and the Europe I describe. And I do want to do that with Germany. And I do trust in Germany. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. We will have. We'll spare the time. I will express my gratitude after 2 questions we may allow. We have microphones in the auditorium. If there's somebody who would like to ask a question to our host, and please be very brief. Is there any question? I can't see. Up there, please. We have to speak up loudly.
Mais quand on voit ce qui se passe à Paris actuellement, c'est-à-dire que les policiers volent les couvertures, les tentes des migrants qui dorment dans la rue, dans la neige, dans le froid actuellement, est-ce qu'il n'y a pas une contradiction logique dans votre discours? Il n'est pas au gouvernement.
D'accord.
Vous êtes un 68 qui s'est acheté un costume et qui a travaillé pour le faire.
Oh, oh, oh.
C'est ton problème qui est vraiment très vieux. Mais vous n'avez rien compris. Non, mais je vais répondre à la question.
Je vais répondre à la question parce qu'elle est importante. Et donc, you want me to speak in English? So I will answer your question in English, and perhaps I will try to explain our friends that there was a question about the lack of consistency in a certain way of my speech, referring to solidarity, given the situation of migrants and the relationship between police in France and these migrants. I'm not here, and I saw at the newspapers some stuff, but I'm not here, neither to defend the migrants on this specific issue, nor the police, because I'm not in charge. But I want to revert on a much more fundamental problem that what you mentioned about this violence or deeds, which is migrants and refugees in France today. First point, it's true that you had a lack of solidarity. No, sorry, may I answer? You had a lack of solidarity coming from a lot of political leaders saying that refugees were not welcome. It's true. When people expressing themselves not on migration but on refugees and saying they didn't want to accept these refugees in their city or elsewhere, this is a lack of solidarity. It's a matter of fact. No, but that's important. Sorry? No, I disagree with that. I expressed myself very clearly about that. But in the political debate, both in France and in Germany, there is a big confusion between refugees, between migration, terrorism, and so on. There is a mixture of all these realities which are profoundly different. So, on refugees, very specifically speaking, if you want more solidarity, first, start with solidarity with the people themselves and the country where they enter into Europe. So let's go to an actual common asylum policy in order to deal with that. Because today, I'm sorry, but it's not speaking about solidarity to park people for months and months, whatever the condition will be, to wait for the answer of the administration. Today, it's not my view about solidarity. So if you want to promote solidarity, okay, let's concur with me to promote a new asylum agreement at the European level to deal with the different countries where these refugees come from. Because this is a unique way to avoid them to take crazy risk to go to there, and this is a unique way to have, I would say, a fast delivery of the titles. This is a necessity. When they wait for 6 months to 8 months to 1 year to have their papers, it's not about solidarity, okay? So that's what I propose. This is the actual solidarity. I'm sorry to say that. The second thing is to have an actual common approach, which is not the case today, to be fair. And the way we dealt with this migration crisis was not coordinated, and it's true to say that the burden taken by Germany, Sweden, Austria has nothing to do with the French one.
Here's another question.
No, I'm sorry to say that. I disagree with that. Never. No, I disagree with that. No, you manipulate what I said, and I disagree with that. Please refer to what I wrote. But I want to leave the floor to another.
Thank you, Mr. Macron. My question is about the place of the European debate and more precisely the European election in France. It is the tragic reality that in France, the European elections are seen as the most boring and the most useless election in our country. And this is really a tragedy. And how do you think we can concretely change this and give the true place it deserves in our country? We need more Civigula, we need more Daniel Cohn-Bendit in our country. And well, we have good European Parliament members, but we also have people who are just there to waiting for a better place. And we see that in this presidential election, tragically. And so how do you think we can concretely change this yes, in France? And I don't know if it's a problem in Germany too, but it's a really fundamental issue, I think.
I do agree with you. The very first point is to speak about Europe during the presidential campaign. In the French landscape, if you don't identify Europe as one of the cornerstone idea and critical series of policies, because it's not one box among the others, it's something which completely designs the other policies. If you don't do so, it's hard to convince your people that Europe is important. So what we are doing, and what I want to do and to promote, is the fact that the European idea is absolutely critical and should be part of the presidential campaign, because this is a unique way to deal with the global world and to defend our place and to deal with sovereignty. First point. And I think that's, for me, a strong expectation from our people. The second point is to try to have another organization. So Sylvie Goulard, you mentioned, had a lot of ideas, and we will promote that, to take some commitments in order to have another organization for European elections, i.e. to have much more promotion of this election, to have much more job being made before in order to explain what is at stake, how to organize it. And third, it's a way to organize yourself, and that's a commitment we will take. We will push, as En Marche, as a political movement, our best people to the European elections, not the one we don't want to see anymore on the domestic issues. And second, if you want to create an actual political debate at the European scale, I think, and that's what I do endorse Danny's idea, it's to have an actual European election for at least these 73 members of the EU, at least in order to reallocate the Brits members of the EU, just to say, okay, it will be the starting point of a common European list, because it will force you to have an actual European debate, to have a European organization, and actual European movement. That's it.
Monsieur Macron, Monsieur le Ministre, c'est un très grand plaisir pour moi, une obligation très agréable qui me reste, c'est de remercier à votre équipe, de remercier à mon équipe avec Madame Müller, de remercier à Madame la vice-présidente, à la Fondation Mercator, à la Commission européenne qui ont tous rendu possible cette conférence. Et je remercie tout particulièrement à l'audience qui est si fidèle à notre institut. Je vous remercie, bien sûr, avant tout, de nous avoir fait témoin de vos idées sur l'Europe, et nous allons tous conserver we will always remember this meeting. I'm sorry, it's too much.
No.
This was admitting that I'm not as professional as you are in switching languages. You will always remember this place, and I'm so glad to pass you some little gift for this remembrance about the university. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Macron.
Succès.
Merci à vous. Merci, messieurs, dames. Merci à vous. Merci beaucoup. Merci à vous. Merci à vous. Descendez, j'entends rien là. Je ne connais pas les plans, mais j'ai pas de problème à